And next to Rhianna, we welcome back former Director of Programmes at BBC News and now Senior Director at Coulson Partners, Katy Searle. Hello.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
No worries, lovely to have you in the studio rather than being out and about.
And what a studio it is. It's very impressive.
It's very lovely. You too, if you're listening, can come and book the studio. I'll tell you how at the end. Where you are now, a lot of reputation management, dealing with big issues. What do the team think about how the election's kicked off and dealing with all of that?
Really interesting time, isn't it? I think, what's happened, the election is announced and then suddenly everyone's in it. There is no time to stop and breathe and think about what's next. So I'm enjoying it from the outside looking in, really, and seeing with interest about how the audience is served. Are any policies getting across? How much is it about fighting from party to party? And crucially, over the last couple of days, as we've seen, Diane Abbott, whether she's going to be an MP or not, really dominating. And so how easy it is in a campaign for it to be completely taken away from where the parties want to take it.
And so, Katy, when you heard the election was called, did you suddenly think, I wish I was back in the newsroom?
No, actually, I was really enjoying watching it from the outside. And I'm somewhat surprised to hear myself say that because I was absolutely addicted and I remain completely addicted to politics and watching the story. But sometimes trying to cover a story, certainly in an organisation as big as the BBC, can be challenging in its own right and also dealing with the parties. So I enjoyed it, loved it. It was the best time. But having done quite a few, I think I'm a little bit happier just watching it from the sidelines this time.
Going back to your old patch, leaders debates. We've got the first one announced with ITV next week. They've done well to get out the door quickly.
Yeah, I mean, the leaders debates have become, haven't they, the kind of common currency of debate around what's going to happen, who's going to get one first, who's going to get them. And actually, I think I've read more and heard more about election debates than perhaps any policy in the news coverage so far. But of course, why is that? Because it matters. It matters hugely to the broadcasters, absolutely. And that matters because of branding, really. The audience used to be huge when they first happened, I think, from memory, back in 2010.
Clegmania.
The combined audience, I think, from memory, God, I got slightly embarrassed, I know this, was about 22 million, I think, collectively. Much lower now. I think they individually get about 4 or 5 million. So, there fewer people watch debates these days. Although, having said that, 4 to 5 million is still a very, very good audience on legacy broadcast, so definitely one to do.
And it will be clipped to death as well.
It will be clipped to death, so it will go everywhere, it will go all over social. And what does it matter for the politics? Well, they became a very useful punctuation mark in the campaigns. But you'll notice that Sunak was quite quick out the door saying he wanted to do one a week. I don't actually believe that's true because that would just eat their time. Because what happens is, of course, you've got to be really on your message. And one a week eats at least a day, in some form.
The planning, you've got to get to the place wherever it is.
Exactly. There'll be security, huge security. That you've got to think through all the separate different sectors that you might need to be across because they don't necessarily follow what might be in your mind that day. You've got to think about what the response is. You've got to think about who the interviewer is and how they behave, what to wear, obviously.
The colours of the tie.
So loads to think about. But they are still proving, interestingly, to be a huge and understandable topic of debate.
Did you enjoy your negotiations for debates, or was that something you'd rather never return to?
Well, I'm really
again?
glad I did it. And I've got to say, in 2019, it was the first head-to-head, the first double-header, and I negotiated that, and I was very pleased to pull it off. But it is like doing a very complicated jigsaw puzzle, especially for the BBC, because you've got to put the head-to-head together with what's become known as the 7-header, which is the balancing programme with all the other parties. Then you've got to think about the question time specials, what the regions are doing. Are we going to do sit-downs, one-to-ones with the big interviewer? So it's not easy to get there.
Looking at BBC, Rhianna, can we remember who is on the BBC lineup for this year?
So on the BBC, it's Clive Myrie and Laura Kuenssberg.
Yes.
Which Clive Myrie, I think, is a really safe pair of hands. I think he's really universally liked. I think a lot of people will feel a lot of trust with that. I think there is a genuine sadness that we're not going to see Hugh Edwards this year. That seems to be at least the conversations that have been happening on my WhatsApp groups. And Laura Kuenssberg, again, I'm not sure if because she works so well on her kind of morning breakfast show, but I think this is going to be like a real trial of fire somehow for her. I wonder if she's going to be up to the challenge.
I mean, Laura gets it from all directions, doesn't she? A lot of social media sort of backlash to her that maybe other people don't get. This is probably about women and social media as well. She's a
woman, yeah.
I mean, are they the right pair for BBC News?
Great choice for the BBC. I mean, obviously, really close former colleagues of mine. Terrific seeing them announce. People have been wondering about what the pairing would be and how the BBC would approach it this time. But I think they're up for a successful night. But
Rhianna, also Channel 4. Good lineup for election night. They always find it quite difficult to get that balance. Is it funny? Is it what are they there to do? I mean, they've gone newsy.
They really have. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because they are normally the sort of, I guess, because they like to try and draw in a younger crowd, and so they do sort of go for the comedy style. But actually, that's not what people want around an election. I think, especially with this one, the stakes feel so much higher than they have in recent years, and there's no point trying to do this in a funny, silly way. So I think they've absolutely done the right thing. Obviously,
so they've added in The Rest is Politics guys, so Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart.
Emily Maitlis.
Off of the newsagents.
They've
already lost Claire Balding.
I know, because of Wimbledon, which is great. I know, poor Claire Balding. But yeah, Emily Maitlis is I think such a huge coup. She really is going to bring in a lot of audiences. I think that's what I mean about the podcast election. They've got their ready-made audiences. Channel 4 have been so clever about this because you have two huge audiences. There will be a crossover, of course, between the newsagents and The Rest is Politics. But, everybody is going to be interested in what Maitlis and Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell have to say. And then, on top of that, signing this deal with The Rest is Politics where they're going to be streaming their podcast live.
Oh, it's interesting.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Have you seen this, Katie? So they're going to put, I think, 6 episodes of The Rest is Politics on Channel 4 in the lead up to the election. Is that a sort of just cheap programming to shove on that is pretty good? Or is that some broader thoughts from Channel 4, do you think?
Clever move. I agree on the election. I think it's a really good lineup. I think it's right to try and be distinctive because the challenge for broadcasters is, let's face it, but I would say this, wouldn't I? But it's true. The BBC gets the majority viewing by far. ITV have been quite clever in their pairing in recent years, but Channel 4, to an extent, Sky News have been left behind in audience terms. I mean, you'll remember that Channel 4, of course, had famously had a sculpture of ice on one debate on climate when I think the government wouldn't put up, and there was a lot of
gradually melting.
Yeah, exactly. Stage, yes. There was a great deal of controversy over that. Certainly got the headlines, but perhaps making this move is more likely to attract that certain part of the audience. And I think, the podcast market is absolutely right. In terms of cheap programming, Newscast, of course, has been doing this for years. We put Newscast on a late slot on BBC One several years ago and proved to be quite a decent success. Yes, of course, it's cheap, because the cameras are... there's not a lot of infrastructure, but it's a good move and makes sense for Channel 4.
And Krishnan as well.
Yes.
Which at least you're always in very safe hands.
Though he does get caught on the hot mic a lot. Another hot mic thing this week.
It's going to make for an interesting night.
Yes. Anybody seen Newsnight this week? Rebooted Newsnight?
I saw a bit of it.
Little bit, yeah. I mean, I've got to say that I think, Newsnight was always going to probably go in this direction because of the challenge in the market on audiences, and I think that's it's obviously very, very upsetting for a lot of people that have followed Newsnight in its previous guise for many, many years. But watching it, I was quite pleasantly surprised. I thought it was a really interesting debate. They did well on the Diane Abbott story. Made some real moves there. Nick Watt is absolutely first class as political editor. Great to see him absolutely staying at Newsnight and good discussions. The question will be around investigations and whether they can maintain that without films. But I think been quite good. I mean,
Rhianna, it's sad when things change.
Yeah.
But if I'm to push back the other way and go, maybe a good focused half hour where they have to rethink it because the budget's changed and you've got to think about it in different ways, is maybe a good thing as well.
I think also with so many more demands, I mean, I hate to be that person, but, we are so used to moving on to the next thing so quickly. And if we know that it's actually half an hour, we're going to get as much in that as possible, that we're able to really kind of quickly, I know it's awful, but the sort of soundbitey kind of conversations, those are the things that travel the furthest. And I think you're right. I think Victoria did a really great job, and it was very succinct, and I feel like they, I understood kind of the pacing of it, I think worked. And yes, it is quite choppy, and there is like a very quick rotation. I think Coco Khan was on, which was from Pod Save the UK, which always love to see her. But then I wasn't somebody who did watch it religiously every single night, and I can imagine that must be quite a difficult shift.
I mean, it's still a very well-resourced news programme.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a decent-sized staff. As I say, the main difference is that they won't have films anymore, which takes away the investigative element. But the BBC is, I think, providing that across the board, more widely spread across programmes. So I suspect we'll see it in different forms.
And sometimes that does go to podcasts, doesn't it? That is perhaps where they'll step up.
We've seen what Mariana Spring's doing, and that's sort of by media. There's tele executions, video executions, as well as the podcast stuff. So it is doable.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in radio, just before the election was called, there were some changes in schedules announced. So Matt Chorley moving from Times Radio to 5 Live, which sort of universally people were like, that's a great thing for 5 Live and quite ballsy. And that's going to happen in September. And then Andrew Neil is going to replace him at Times Radio. It's quite a good response for them. And then it all falls apart because the election's called really early.
Yes. I've got skin in this game because Matt Chorley is taking over the slot that I do the film and TV reviews on. I do it with Nahal at the moment, and it means that I've lost my job.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Maybe a renegotiation with him.
I just feel like my politics game isn't going to be up to scratch, sadly. But yes, I think it will. I think it has, and it's maybe backfired a tiny bit, the timing of it.
Yeah.
What do you reckon they could do?
It goes to where we started. We're all slightly caught out on the timing. I'd be interesting to see if they can release them earlier, but I suspect that won't quite happen because we're in it already. So they'll pick up kind of beginning of a new season, if you like, ready for the new parliament.
And just on looking at some other things connected to the election and things that we talked about in the election special. Broadcast trucks are brought in from all over Europe for the general election. All of those leisure centres need some gear outside. Is that going to be trouble when you've got Euros, Wimbledon, Glastonbury all happening at the same time?
Yes.
Is it just going to be on people on 4G phones trying to call in results?
It is. I mean, it's a nightmare in terms of scheduling and booking trucks. I can probably talk more about the scheduling than the booking trucks, but we know the trucks are needed because you can't do big OBs off tiny phones. You can do little ones, but you can't do big ones. So they'll be frantically trying to book ahead. And share. I mean, there's the broadcasters work quite well together, so where they can share, they will, because otherwise nobody will get on air. But I suspect the supply and demand means the cost of trucks have gone up a little at this period.
Yes.
But in terms of the scheduling, going back to the debates, of course, what they'll be looking at is which games of the Euros are on which channel. And when you're looking, and we had this actually a few years ago, there was a tournament of some kind that you look at every night and you think, well, we can't do that night. And the politicians say, well, we want to do it that night. Well, the Euros are on, so, and to an extent they'll recognise that they won't get the audience if they're up against a big match, so you really are doing dancing around lots of other things, which reminds me of my classic night of when COVID restrictions were brought back in and we were fighting against one of the, I think it might have even been Strictly Final, but it was one of the big Strictly shows, and waiting for Boris Johnson to write his speech, reintroducing COVID regulations and cancelling Christmas, actually, I think it was, and trying to avoid moving Strictly because no one moves Strictly.
Yes.
So
even the Prime Minister.
Yeah, even the Prime Minister. So there's all those scheduled conversations are quite tough. Yeah. Well,
I think the women's football's been bumped for the first ITV debate over to ITV4. Okay, one more story before the break, and that's news that the Evening Standard is going to cease daily publication and move to weekly. Rhianna, you're in and about London. Have you been picking up the Standard, or do you pick up your phone on the tube?
Oh, I'm awful. I do pick up the phone. Although the other day there was a Standard in front of me, and so I did. If it's literally in my hands, I will read it. But yes, otherwise I'm not. So it makes sense, and unbelievably, I could. 6 years, I think they said, where they've had losses, 6 straight years. So it does make sense to move to an online platform. Of course, it is kind of devastating for everybody working in the media that physical media is just dying on its arse. Although somebody was telling me the other day that their kids are always their favourite thing, their favourite treat is to get a magazine.
All right,
which is quite a cheering thought.
That's because toys come with them.
Oh no! This is a teenager. So hopefully that. But it's probably the more salacious gossip.
Yeah.
I mean, the Standard have sort of said that they had this with The Independent, and they moved that into an online publication, which has had pretty decent success.
It's worked, yeah, exactly. And I think but I suppose that because there are so many other options, I don't think that your first idea if you're looking for news is to go online to find what the Evening Standard are saying. That's the only issue.
I remember talking to the old boss, the Metro, once on the first day of Metro, when they were still trying to persuade advertisers that this would be a decent thing. They took a load of ad agency people onto the tube on the morning of the launch. And of course, everybody was holding up a Metro, reading it, and that was like the big sell of like, you've got to be involved in this.
Yeah.
This time they've said the killer is Wi-Fi on the Tube network, and now quite a lot of 5G on the Tube network. Katie, right time to rest a daily newspaper in the capital?
A real shame, isn't it? You know, it's been with us for many, many, many years, and actually a great paper as well. And as you say, you know, London, it's massive world's capital city, and to lose its main paper is a huge shame. But as Rhianna says, I'm afraid it is the sign of the times, and the newspaper industry are facing huge challenges, and so I think it was probably inevitable.
Well, we'll be back to talk Edinburgh TV Festival lineups, a curious new job at News UK, and of course the media quiz after this. Welcome back. Rhianna and Katie are back for some more news in brief. The first speakers have been announced for the Edinburgh International TV Festival, including Clarkson's Farm exec Andy Willman in conversation with Jane Root. Will.i.am on AI. Got to get that right. And NBC's Warren Littlefield, him behind Must See TV, I guess, in the 90s. Rhianna, if you could ask any of them a question, what would it be? Who'd you pick?
I think it would be Warren Littlefield because that's much more my area. You know, Handmaid's Tale, Fargo, Dope Sick, some incredible dramas out there. And he seems to have a knack, especially with Dope Sick and Handmaid's Tale, of really tapping into these stories which really resonate with what's going on in the world, but in a very incredibly bleak way. So I guess I'd ask them about, which next horrific subject are you going to tackle in a really art house way?
I mean, it's amazing he's sort of stuck around for so long. TV execs don't normally last this long. It's quite the re-emergence after kind of knocking out Friends and Seinfeld and ER and Cheers.
Yeah, it's true. But it's also, I think that's quite exciting. There is a thing about longevity in TV. It means that you've kind of seen the ups and the downs. They've seen all of the trends. They know they're not so quick, I think, to react, to sort of have knee-jerk reactions. Will.i.am talking about AI is actually the probably the thing that interests me the least. His app FYI is for your ideas.
Oh gosh!
And it's sort of like a social. What is it? Like yeah, I can't even describe this in an easy. It's kind of like WhatsApp, maybe a bit like Slack, a bit sort of like sharing your creative ideas at work, and you can.
Interesting.
Create things on it, I think.
Does he pop up like Clippy of the past
to
make suggestions about your life?
I don't know what would be more irritating. So yeah, I'm not. But Rowan Woods is a great addition to head up the Edinburgh Festival. So I'm excited to kind of see what that programme will look like in its entirety.
Katie, Jane Root commissioned the original reboot of Top Gear, which Willman obviously worked on with Clarkson. That should make quite an interesting conversation, I would have thought.
Yeah, I've been watching Clarkson's Farm, a huge hit, and very, very unexpected, but really quite gripping. And it's interesting to watch his career go from Top Gear through to Clarkson's Farm, and it to be such a success in that form. On AI, I think it's interesting actually that the festival is putting that so front and centre. You know, what does it say about the state of the industry, the creative ideas that might come out of it, and what TV will look like in the next couple of years.
Finally, before the quiz, News UK have advertised for a development exec that can turn newspaper IP into TV dramas. Rhianna, do we know what's prompted this?
I mean, this has been going on for a little while because The Guardian struck a deal, I think, back in November with Sony, which, I mean, obviously it's to do with the sort of missed debates versus the post office and how vital that was for getting this incredible story, which had been out there for such a long time, but finally getting it into the public consciousness. And now, you know, we are, I think, perhaps even being a little bit more mindful when we're reading, well, I certainly have been, about, you know, injustices that are going on and have been going on for such a long time, and wondering if that one day will be made into a drama. But there's also that very cynical thing. I mean, I think even in Inside Number 9 last couple of weeks ago, there's a bit, it's on BBC Two, there's a bit where there's a potential murder that might have happened, and the first thing somebody says is, oh, will this be a Netflix documentary? Will I be in it? And there is an element of that, of sort of like, you know, mining for these really quite tragic stories. But it depends how they play it. You know, if it is about, you know, in the public interest, I think that could work really, really well. If it is just more of exploiting personal tragedy, I think we are probably going to be really quite exhausted by that in the very near future.
I mean, Katy, this is a little bit like what we've been talking about with the Standard, where they've got to change the business model. And the previous business model was keep everything for yourself, keep it for the Sunday, keep it for the next edition. Have all these media companies, they got to think about IP and third parties and getting their special source to other places?
Yeah, it's just about making money and survival, really. I mean, there's, you know, we've seen what's happened to the advertising market as well, in television as well. On the Bates, the Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, it's interesting to note, I think I'm right about this, that they haven't actually made that much money on it.
I think it's pretty much been loss-making.
Yeah, because of the overseas sales. So I would imagine that executives making these decisions are really looking at stories that will sell beyond the UK. And of course, you couldn't really get much more England about the post office, and so you can see the kind of natural read across. But, you know, looking at the papers, you think, is the blood contamination story going to be the next one? You know, as you say, Rhianna, there's going to be ones that you just think, well, that would make a good tale. And, you know, the human interest has always been where you go. And finally on this, I think if you look at how crime and human interest stuff, but particularly crime, is represented on certainly Netflix, but now on BBC iPlayer, it's presented as not news but drama. And when you think about it for a second, actually it's news, you know, and documentary, but it's presented and turned into much more of a drama presentation, which I think is quite clever actually, and will help the views.
Do you think we'll see other newspaper groups jump on it? The Daily Star and the Lettuce, the Trust Lettuce. Could be six-part Netflix special.
The Lettuce was just an inspired started, by the way, by The Economist.
Okay.
I think I'm right in saying that it was a small line in The Economist, and someone very clever at the Star read it and turned it into an actual lettuce, which I want to meet that person.
Well, maybe, you know, they are looking for candidates like that. So spotting the potential in a story, going from lettuce to a feature film might be his next step. Or her next step.
Yes, we will see more of that. Okay, just enough time for the media quiz. This week we're playing Polish pollsters. Oh gosh. I'll read you a headline, loosely translated into Polish. What's Matt making me do?
I hate Matt.
You tell me what the media election story is. Polish pollsters. Right, so buzz in with your name if you know the answer.
Oh.
So Rhianna, you will say...
Rhianna.
And Katy, you will say...
Katy.
Let's play Polish pollsters.
Ian Dale opuszcza LBC, aby zgłosić się jako poseł.
Okay, let's listen to that again.
Ian Dale opuszcza LBC, aby zgłosić się jako poseł.
Katy.
Katy, what do you think it is?
Ian Dale is leaving LBC to be a candidate for the Tory party.
He is. Friend of the show, Ian Dale, leaves LBC to put himself forward as an MP. His selection takes place today, Friday. He's not so far said which party he's standing for. I guess we're assuming the Conservatives.
Tories.
On air, it's been interesting. He's been a bit... I think he voted Lib Dem in one of the council elections, but he's sort of a lefty Tory, I think.
And he's, Tunbridge Wells.
And Tunbridge Wells is where he lives.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably a good chance. I was having a look at the swing. He's got a chance of keeping that.
I mean, I live in Sevenoaks and it is a Tory hold, pretty much, always. I think mine's Laura Trott.
I have a question as to why the Polish press are interested in Ian Dale, but maybe that's off the point.
I think merely a format point, sadly. Do you think a bit of a loss, though, for LBC, Katie?
Huge figure for LBC. Incredibly popular. Has been there for a very, very long time. Very, very good broadcaster. But look, they're not short of good broadcasters on LBC, so good luck to him.
Yes, good luck to Ian. Hopefully he'll come on and tell us how it all went. Right, question number 2, play the tape.
Matt Ford spróbuje przeprowadzić wywiad z kandydatem Z.
Rihanna, this is about Matt Ford interviewing all the constituencies, basically 650 candidates from all of the constituencies before the election.
Yes, having to interview someone from every constituency before polling day. That is 650. That's a lot
in a month.
That's a lot to get through, Katie.
It's a lot. He said, good luck. It's a lot of travelling and a lot of bad food, I suspect. Yeah, on the road.
Well, I think they're going to be virtual. I think he's just going to literally sit in his home and try and dial up. Still quite a lot. That's still a lot to manage.
And it's also quite repetitive, and he'll get a very sore bottom sitting there for hours.
I sent him a message to say he should come on and talk about it. He was like, I would like to. I'm just not quite sure how I'm going to do it. So hopefully we'll hear that. He's doing for a podcast, The Political Party. Do you think you can keep it interesting enough for 650 interviews for the public?
Do you know what? I would say no normally, but having interviewed Matt Ford, if anybody can keep it interesting.
He's a funny guy, right?
It's him. Yeah. He is one of the loveliest people I've ever spoken to. So, yes, I think he will do it.
Right. So that's a point apiece. The final one, let's have the headline.
Mirror I Telegraph jako pierwsze ujawniają poparcie dla partii.
Okay. Let's have a listen again.
Mirror I Telegraph jako pierwsze ujawniają poparcie dla partii.
It's something to do with the Telegraph.
Yeah, that's the bit I got.
So the Mirror and the Telegraph have been the first papers to do what? Buzz in?
To say Rihanna. To say who they are voting for, essentially, in the election. They've come out on...
And can you have a guess what they went for?
Which way did they go? Oh, wow. Can't guess.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, the Mirror with Labour and the Telegraph with the Conservatives. Katie, are the Sun and not always the Times, but the Sun likes to back a winner. They have not been particularly pro Labour. What are they gonna say?
Oh, your guess is as good as mine, but you're right. I think they are, traditionally very good at moving to the winner post. And there's been quite a lot of coverage about this, haven't there, in the last few weeks? And you've got to wonder kind of how late do they leave it to decide when the winner is clear. But debate also as to whether it's a good idea for papers to back political parties, although there's a long history for it.
Rhianna, does it matter who the paper backs?
I think they back them, don't they, whether they say they do or not. So, and I think people who read them know exactly what and who they're reading. So actually, I sort of think it's a moot point. I think we know, as you just said. So, yeah, I don't think it really matters.
Okay, well, that makes you, Rhianna, our winner. Congratulations. You have to go and interview 650 local newspapers to get their political positions for next week's show. So good luck to that.
Thanks so much.
My thanks to Rhianna Dhillon and Katy Searle. Rhianna, where can people keep up with your fine work?
I'm on 6 Music every Monday morning on Lauren Deverne show from about 9:30. I'll be on Radio 5 Live every other Thursday, maybe like 3 more times before that show ends. And I'm also on Katie Piper's breakfast show on ITV doing film and TV reviews at the moment.
Loads of appearances. And Katie, how can people keep up with you?
Follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and find me at Coulson Partners for some excellent advice.
Lovely. Thank you both.